Hi, this is Kevin from Rebuilders. Welcome back to another episode here. I am so excited about this one because it comes up so much for me as I talk to people about what's going on with them. So today we're going to talk about boundaries and really some three key things to think about when you're dealing with boundaries. So let me just start with giving you an example of what boundaries are that I see a lot of times in relationships. Somebody says to me, I saw red flags on our first date. So let's take a typical scenario of how this might play out. So let's say there's a woman named Mary, and she meets, let's say they live in St. Louis, and she meets this guy John at the supermarket, and he asks her out on a date. She says, great. They go out on their first date, and everything is fantastic. They're both just excited to meet each other and meet someone new, and things are great. They agree to go out on a second date. Well, what happens is that just as Mary is headed out the door to meet him at a restaurant for dinner, she gets a call from her dad. Her mom's in the hospital in Minneapolis. And so she's talking to him about, well, how is she doing? What happened? Turns out she had a heart attack. And so she says, okay, well, I'll be there as soon as I can. And he says, it's okay. She's stable. But get here as soon as you can because it certainly would be good to have you here. So she calls the airlines, tries to figure out a flight out, and they say, we don't have any flights tonight. The earliest one we can book you on is tomorrow morning. So she agrees to that, and now she's done with that. So now she realizes, oh my gosh, I haven't called John yet or told him. So she rushes out the door. She feels guilty about not telling him, and so she gets there as quick as she can. Well, she's about 30 minutes late. She gets there, and before she can even apologize, John is angry and he starts getting mad at her about being late, that this is not okay. This is, you didn't even tell me. You didn't tell me what's going on. Well, finally she has a chance to explain what's happening. Well, John's still mad. He's still angry about what happened. And they try and carry on with the date. And it was okay, but they moved on. So a couple things about this. So let's just take this scenario. Now let's jump forward 20 years later. So now I'm talking to Mary on the phone, and she says, this is the first time I saw this, and I should have paid attention to it, because guess what? It got worse throughout their marriage. Things where John simply would not listen to her, understand her, take the time to recognize her. And Mary gave everything she could in this marriage trying to make it work. And finally she says, I can't do it anymore. I just can't live like this, and she's ready for divorce. So a couple things about this story is, one, obviously I changed the names of Mary and John to protect some of the stories of real people that I've talked to who have had something like this. The other thing is I changed the gender of each person. It was actually Mary who was the one who was berating John, and John was the one who was upset and was trying to figure out how to fly out. Now, certainly, many times what we see is that men are basically assumed to be the one who are the ones who are angry. They use anger to do that, and it is very, very common. But we also see a version of this story, which is with women, that they give everything to the relationship in the hopes of making it work and wanting to get along. And so it happens in all kinds of relationships. It's not just one side or the other. Okay, so what's really going on? So let's talk about this. So there's a lot happening in any kind of a story like this. In fact, if we took 20 years of the marriage of Mary and John, it would be a lot to try and unravel. But let's just take this particular instance and start to break it down and talk about some things that happened in just this one situation to understand what are boundaries. Where do they happen? How do we deal with them? Why do we not follow them? All of those things. Okay, so we could start with just trying to figure out the facts of what happened and what could have Mary done differently. So let's do that really quick, but then we'll talk about more around this. So certainly Mary had a few things going on. One was she was probably fairly distraught about this. To know that your mom is in the hospital, that she's very ill, potentially could pass away, that's really hard. And so, she had every right to say, I just can't go out on this date. She could have called John and said, I'm sorry, but my mom's in the hospital and I can't make it. regardless of what John said. Now, another thing is that she certainly could have actually got off the phone either before she started calling the airlines or after. She might have been able to call John and say, hey, something's come up. I'm trying to deal with this. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. She could have done that before she called the airlines or after, or on her way out the door to meet him. So she had options there to do something different. The other thing then is that when she got there and John started being angry at her, she had every right to either say, I need to interrupt you and tell you that I had a more important thing happening than you. And I'm sorry that if that made you angry, but this is the situation. Or she could have decided that, hey, John, you don't get to treat me this way. I'm leaving. So she had options along the way to decide what that was. Now you can kind of see in some of the things that I've said is Mary chose the route of submitting to what John was doing to her. She had the choice to say things, to take physical actions, things like that can happen. So why was it that she did this? And why do most people do this? Here's the key. Mary put John before herself. She decided that it was more important to please him than it was to take care of herself. And this is something that happens all the time with people, is that they, we value others. We want acceptance. We want to be, we value the relationship. They do so much trying to please others, and they put others before themselves. There's studies that show how common it is that people will actually, how much they will give of themselves in order to do this. So many marriages are based off of years of supporting the spouse, taking care of the house, taking care of the kids, taking care of, or on the other way, doing the job, arranging so many things. Whether it's men or women, both sides do this. So the key thing here to understand about why we make these decisions is a lot of times for people, their decision that they're making to not say something, to not do something, is based on fear. They fear what might happen if they say something. What if they don't like me? What if they leave me? What if they're mad? What if this is I'm going to feel guilty about what I said or what I meant. They feel shame about making a poor decision, so they stick with it rather than fess up and just say this is not what happened. So that's one thing, is we make our decisions based off fear. We make that, and we stay in relationships for so long, knowing that it's not a healthy relationship, that it's not good, that it's not something that is fundamentally going to help us. So another thing I want to talk about here is that a lot of times people will, they wonder, like when they make a choice and they say yes when they should have said no. One of the things that happens for a lot of people is it's hard under pressure to say no. A lot of people aren't good at that, to be able to say, this really isn't a good thing for me. So one of the things you can do is, if you say yes to something, or you submit to something, or anything, you always have the choice to come back and say, you know what, I made a bad decision. I actually would like to change my answer to no. And this is again where it's hard for people to do this. We'll talk about that in a little bit of why. But if you say yes and you feel bad afterwards, then you should have said no. And there's always an opportunity to go back and correct that. To say, I made a mistake, or I don't want this, or I said this for whatever reason, and for my own sake, I need to change my decision. You always have the right to do that, and that is what's essentially keeping your power. Now, what happens when you actually do something like this? When you actually start asserting yourself and saying, this is not okay with me, or, here's my boundary, do not cross it, or, you know what, I don't like being treated that way, or this is I have certain expectations for how you're going to treat me, what you're going to say to me, how you're going to say it, all of these things. Those are ways that you can start asserting yourself of saying, here are my boundaries. But underneath this, if we don't do that, if we don't start saying what we really think, what we really need, what we really want, we're doing that because we think that if we give somebody else everything, that they're going to like us. And here's the terrible truth. That's manipulation. It is manipulation to not tell somebody the truth. If you know something underneath that you're not saying, that you're not doing, and still continuing on without that, it becomes then transactional. In other words, what happens is if I give you this, then you have to give me that. There's almost like a secret demand within those kinds of relationships. And again, 95% of relationships are like this. So in other words, if I, for guys, if I fix the house, then you'll be intimate with me tonight. If I pay the bills, then you're going to give me anything I want. Then I get to choose where we go on vacation. If I cook dinner, then you have to clean up. If I do all this stuff for the kids, then you're responsible for, say, taking care of the house. All of these things are based off of sort of manipulation. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't be healthy ways of doing things. If you're both in agreement of saying, hey, I think it's fair that if I'm doing these things and you're doing those things, then it works. But if you have this intent underneath it that isn't communicated, that isn't obvious, that isn't, if you aren't giving to yourself as much as the other person, then what you're doing is you're secretly expecting them to like you. Now, a lot of times relationships, fundamentally what happens is I gave everything to this person, and this is what they did to me. I hear that all the time. All the time. People feel when marriages start to fall apart that I gave my life to this person. And he or she did this. He or she is already dating somebody. He or she is, lied to me. He or she took all of our money. There's so many things that people do that they feel so manipulated and wronged by. And somewhere in that, the relationship started to fall apart, in part, not entirely, but in part because of boundaries. Because we didn't learn how to truly deal with them and set them as a reasonable way. Now, I want to do one other sort of caution here, which is that I've talked to people who have gone out and their marriages have fallen apart because they started setting boundaries in an unhealthy way. So people can sometimes turn to boundaries and say, and use that as proof that I should get to do what I want. And it becomes a very selfish thing. Boundaries are not about trying to, again, get something out of a relationship or saying, I deserve to get back everything that I gave away. Boundaries are about saying this is what's okay and this is what's not okay. And if you cross that line, then there will be consequences. And that's another big thing, is that so many times people don't convey what the consequences are. It's kind of like, a 2-year-old that starts throwing peas at their mom, there's going to be consequences. They deserve to understand that's not okay. But if you're 40 years old and still acting like everybody owes you, then that's not okay either. And there's a certain limit to what's enough and what's not. And so understanding that takes, it's complex to work through, but those are the kinds of things that happen. So this is a very quick introduction into boundaries. I wanted to talk about it because there's just so many things that people run into and they struggle with trying to understand it. So, boundaries are so important. We talk more about boundaries in our courses and our individual coaching. If that's something you're interested in, go to rebuilders.net. Let's talk about it and figure out what's the right fit for you. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell. Please let us know that you're watching these and that you value them. When I make these videos, it is somewhat like a vacuum that I'm talking into this and not knowing whether this is resonating for you or not. So please let me know that this is helpful for you. You can do that in the comments. You can do that by subscribe. Anything you can do is helpful. That's all for today. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.